There you go. You got to hit that extra blue button. All right, good afternoon. Welcome to our second session in the Administrator Forum series. We're going to be providing other sessions throughout the 2023-24 school year. We look forward to your participation at this and future sessions. These sessions are a collaboration between the Early Childhood Development Department at the Illinois State Board of Education and Early Childhood Professional Learning, otherwise known as ECPL, which is a project of the Center Resources for Teaching and Learning. My name is Tammy King, and I work for ECPL. A few housekeeping items before we get started. Please be sure your name in the participant list is the same first and last name that you used to register for this session. We need this for attendance purposes. If necessary, please edit your name to ensure we're able to confirm your attendance at today's session. Today's session will be and is being recorded, and the recording will be posted on the ECPL YouTube channel within the upcoming week. Due to the large number of participants, your microphones will be muted throughout the session. However, the chat will remain open for your comments. Please remain in the session to hear important information about upcoming events. And now I'd like to introduce Jenny Metcalf, who is a principal consultant in the Early Childhood Development Department at ISBE.
Thanks, Tammy. Hi, everybody. Good to see you again for our second session. Just want to give a couple quick plugs. Last month we had the compliance checklist and monitoring overview, was greatly attended, so I appreciate that. I have had a lot of questions about access to that information for some of your team members that may not have been able to be there. Just wanted to remind you, and Susie will talk about this too, that all of these webinars are archived on the ECPL YouTube channel. So that session is on there and you can definitely go and share it with your team. I also am going to be plugging this every month, and you're going to get tired of hearing this, but April 22nd and 23rd is going to be our in-person Preschool for All Expansion Administrator Forum. All the ISB consultants will be there, and we definitely want all of you there. So I wanted to keep plugging that as we get closer to that time. And so today our second session is about early childhood education and care, expulsion and suspension. I know this is a topic that a lot of people sometimes have questions about, and so we're really excited to welcome Dr. Antoinette Taylor today, who has such great knowledge on this area and will share it all with you. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Dr. Taylor.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Happy daylight savings time / it's getting dark too soon time in Illinois. So welcome, welcome, welcome. We see that you have been looking through the chat. I've seen some familiar names in there. So hello again to those of you who haven't seen pre-pandemic, and hello and welcome to those of you who are first time I'm getting a chance to see you today. As Jenny and Tammy said, there are a lot of people registered for this session today, and we certainly know that even more people are going to be coming in. So the first thing, this is the Early Childhood Education and Care Expulsion and Suspension PFA Virtual Forum. This is a little bit of information about myself and the work that I do here in the state and around the country. Want to let you know that this is such a serious topic. I started to put the like Debbie Downer slide up because it's such a serious topic that we're talking about when children are not in school for any reason. It's really serious, and we all understand that. But we want to let you know that the goal is to bring this information to you. I've kind of chunked it so that we can chew it in a way. So the way it's chunked is that going to give some contextual background of like, how do we get to this point in the first place? Then talk an overview of the law itself, and then we'll start talking about some resources. So why do we want to talk about the resources? We know on the compliance checklist, that compliance checklist that like guides our every moment, right? What our goal is, and I'm actually getting ahead of myself in our time together today. We want to try to move beyond compliance. So Dr. Taylor, what do you mean by that? The compliance checklist does say that you have to have a plan. And we want that plan to really be a plan. We want the resources that you have available to you. We want the strategies that you're doing to really be a viable, attainable, and sustainable plan that not only works for those children in your programs that we might give the I hate to use challenging behavior. I prefer to use, children that they are in duress and their behavior is showing us that there is something that they need from us. And the duress that we see is how they are explaining that to us, right? So we want it to be a good plan. And just like anything else, I'm so happy to see Tammy on here today. That's like my multilingual learner, comrade in arms. And Jenny can shake her head on this if Christy Doan were on here, or anybody from Started or Early Choices talking about specialized services. We would all say there is no one thing that just works for one student or one population of student, right? So if we have good strategies in place, if we have a good plan in place that helps us deal with children when they are in duress, then that plan is going to help everyone, and not just the students, the educators and our staff as well. So the whole goal of this is to kind of get through that contextual, talk about the law, and then really help us to be able to see the resources that you have in place to marry a plan with implementation. So here we go. Oh my gosh. We love Zoom. We hate Zoom. We love WebEx. We can't stand, like, we have had more than enough of all these virtual meetings since March 2020. So necessary, and it has been a way for us to keep ourselves together. But in that positive, there's a little bit of a dilemma, and it's what you see here before you. You get in your breakout room, and the first thing someone says is, what was the question again? Oh, I thought it was going to be in the chat. What are we supposed to be doing? There's always that one floating head that never gets into a room. They're still in that main room. And then just when everything gets just the way we want it, somebody says, the counter is time, the timer is counting down. We're about to go back into the main room. So we're going to do this today without breakout rooms. We're going to keep all of us together for a couple of reasons. There really is strength in numbers. And as you are going in the chat, putting in your questions or responding to some of the Q&A that we're going to be having, we really want us to all learn from each other. So we will not be doing breakout rooms today. It'll kind of be like, that opening session. Here I go again, Jenny, at the Spring Administrators Forum, which we just hope to see you all there. Those morning sessions, those plenary sessions, those keynote sessions, when we're all together and you get to see your colleagues, there really is good energy with that. And so that's how we're going to do our time together today. We will not be having any breakout rooms. We'll just all be one big old happy family. And that means we'll be utilizing the chat, as I said, and we're going to start utilizing the chat right now. If you would please just give us an idea of what brought you to this conversation today. Go ahead and put that in the chat. Going to use my teacher wait time to see those start coming in. I will read some of them. Okay, let's try this again. Thanks for your patience, everyone. I've seen that you're putting information in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and read that. Please, I'm just going to say it again. Make sure that you are watching yourself and that you are on mute. I am the pre-K family support specialist to gain a better understanding of suspension and expulsion in pre-K kindergarten. Oh, yes, Jeannie Bratton, you are now my co-facilitator because you just laid, the goose that laid the golden egg. I am interested in learning best practices. I am interested in learning best practices. So right away, we're shifting from a deficit lens of, well, we can't suspend, we can't expel, we got all these challenging behaviors, what are we supposed to do? We're interested in learning best practices. And that takes me back to that beginning statement that I said. When we have best practices, evidence-based practices in place, it covers everything. It covers the support we need for our students who are struggling when it comes to social emotional development. It covers our students as we're talking about language arts. It covers when we're talking about science, technology, engineering, and math. evidence-based practices, not only do they stand the test of time, but they are usually generalizable and transferable across settings, across domains of development, and across content areas. So I'm looking at everything that's coming in, and we just want to kind of put our hook in and let that take us to best practices. Jennifer Tucker learned the policies of expulsion and suspension. Well, let me just tell you, there's an app for that. In your packet that you got from ECPL, there was 2 pages of resources for you all. We want you to, not now because you're listening in here, but this is the type of thing that when you start having your in-service meetings, we want you to go back to this and pull this up. This is not the everything, because literally you would have had almost a little booklet, but these are good, sound, vetted. I want to say that again, as we're looking at suspension, expulsion, or really anything that we're doing in our programs, we want to make sure that we're using good vetted sources. And so some of these sources came out in the midst of the beginning of the pandemic, and you may have missed them. And so we do that resource page that you got in your packet. We want to make sure that you use that, utilize it in your in-services, utilize it afterwards. You can always reach out to Illinois State Board of Education, ECPL, DCFS. That information is on here as well. If you find questions once you start going through those resources where you need a little bit more support. Okay, so why in the world are we here in the first place? And this is that contextual background part of our conversation today. The truth is, over time, we saw surges and information that was telling us that children were not in school, particularly young children, right? Children in the ages of birth to 5, 6-year-old children were being suspended a lot. They were being expelled. And it wasn't just the fact that they were being suspended or expelled. It was the fact that literally families were coming into their, picking up children. And then on the day that they're picking them up, almost being told they can't come back tomorrow. And so without a plan, without warning, they did have warning. We were telling them all along that the child was a behavior problem. That's not really a plan. That's not really family engagement. Too many children, research was showing us, were being removed from their programs, removed from their district, early childhood programs, without warning, without notice, and without any type of plan. Number one, to support the families, and number two, how are we going to help the child? In Illinois, believe it or not, way before the 2014 data came, this became a priority in our state at the K-12 level. It was addressed by Senator Lightford and Representative Davis, trying to halt that school to prison pipeline, trying to transform. And I really like that word, transform. It's not that we didn't have a system in place, but that system needed to be reformed. That system needed to be transformed so that we're proactive versus reactive. Okay. And so really in Illinois, especially if we look at our country today, we seem to be so divisive. In Illinois, this was a strong piece of legislation that was passed with very strong bipartisan support in the Senate and in the House. And that bill is known as Public Act 99-456, but it's affectionately known as SB 100. And here's what that bill actually was about and what it put into place. What are the restorative practices that we have in place when we see that children are struggling when it comes to their socially emotional behavior, knowledge, and skills? What are the things that we can do that are alternatives to immediately suspending and expelling students or constantly referring them to alternative schools? The good thing that I really love about this bill, SB 100, is that it was really driven by the voice of our young children. Voices of Youth in Chicago Education, is actually a part of Loyola Civitas, their whole law department. And it's really young people that bring to the forefront things at Loyola where they say, you know what, our peers are struggling with this, we are struggling with this. And so Voice actually worked with Loyola Civitas, and they said, you know what, we're seeing so many of our peers being expelled and suspended from school, but we need help. Our peers need help, and we're not really seeing that help come in the form of what could take place in the school or support. We're only seeing children being asked to leave. And they had such a strong argument that they took it to Senator Lightford, Kimberly Lightford, and she moved forward with creating some legislation about it. And so what was that supposed to do? Halt the practice that pushed students out of school, halt harsh discipline practices. Sometimes suspension and expulsion, it feels like it's criminalizing our students. The data showed that this was particularly a disproportionate when it came to children of color, students of color. And the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights data did back that up. Okay, so that's just what the data showed us, right? Moving on. Prior to 2014, and this is what I just love so much about Illinois, Illinois had actually began to look at this as early as 2002. So in 2002, there was a study of the University of Illinois, Chicago and Erickson. And as research goes, research usually says, what is the implication for further review? And so Walter Gilliam's study actually came from, and when you look at the law, the early childhood expulsion law, you're going to see tidbits of all of this in that law. We gave you a link that gives you the resource of the text of the law, so you don't have to figure out all those amendments. It really gives you a printer-friendly or layman's-friendly text of the law. You'll see this information in there. So U of I did a study, along with Erickson did a study in 2002. Walter Gilliam's study was informed by that on a broader level across the country. The Department of Ed's Office of Civil Rights information came out in 2014. And then look what we found. Infants and toddlers had a very high expulsion rate. Toddlers. 4-year-olds were 50% more likely to be expelled than 3-year-olds. African Americans were twice as likely to be expelled than Caucasian peers. Okay, let's press pause there. I want to just hang my hat here for a minute so that we are very clear what this data showed us. This data did not show us that non-African American teachers were expelling African American children. This was not an issue of color. White teachers were expelling Black children. It was all teachers. In that number included teachers who are African American, teachers who are Latinx, teachers who are Caucasian, all the cultures that we might think of. African American children were twice as likely to be expelled than their Caucasian peers. Okay, so I just mentioned that so that as we have this conversation, we are making sure that we're focused on what it's really about, which is the system that needs to be in place to support all educators so that we can continue to provide, implement our learning standards, implement a curriculum to fidelity for all children. And then look at this last one. Preschool children were being expelled 3 times the rate of our K-up students. And Jen Stricker, now you can't, there's 157 of us on, so I can't see everyone. So I just saw Jen shaking her head like, what is really going on here? This is terrible, right? So you are my second co-facilitator today because you're giving me life right now. So thanks, Jen, right? So it's really something to press pause when you say, young children are being expelled at a higher rate than their K-12 counterparts. Something needed to happen. When you think of infant and toddlers, that is letting us know what's happening when it comes to developmentally appropriate practices for young children. Toddlers who are 2 years old, who some of them are just beginning to walk, some of them are still learning how to be toileted, are being expelled from their programs. Now, as we look at bullet point number 2, and I saw several of you in the chat as you were coming in. Some of you were sending me some direct messages. Hey, Dr. Antoinette. Hey, back to all of you. As we look at this second bullet point and we see childcare programs, we want to look at this with the same lens as we did that conversation about a disproportionate amount of children who are African American were being expelled. This was not an indictment on the quality of childcare programming. It was not an indictment on any administrator or educator that is within a childcare program. The data simply told us that 40% of childcare programs, the data said, were asking children to leave, basically asking the families like, this isn't a good fit for you. And it mostly had to do with social and emotional behavior problems. This is what Gilliam's study told us, right? He went a little bit deeper there. Look at that fourth bullet point. Illinois reported the 6th lowest expulsion rate. Woohoo, we love that, but still 3 times more likely to expel preschoolers than K-12. This was the thing that really made all of us sit up and notice. Because with the Office of Civil Rights data, that was letting us know that this is actually a civil rights issue in our country. It did skew towards students identified as male at birth. However, later on, we did start beginning to see African American girls falling into this number as well. If you look at that 2014, everyone, it predates the Every Student Succeeds Act. And that's key because as our country was getting ready to reauthorize No Child Left Behind, this data that was coming out was really on the minds of federal legislators, state legislators, and consultants such as myself as to what might we do to put equitable practices within the upcoming law that would help us not just point fingers and say, well, what's the problem? What's the problem? What's the problem? Put mechanisms in place to try to address the problem. Okay, so we're not pointing fingers at anyone. We're pointing fingers at the problem, not at people. And that includes educators, that includes family members, and it certainly includes our children. Here's what that data from the Office of Civil Rights said. Now, that third piece made us sit up and take notice. And a lot of what Jenny was saying earlier, like, well, we're getting all these questions about the plan. That third point is why. We were surprised when the data said, guess what? Children with disabilities and children who are multilingual learners are not disproportionately suspended in public preschool. I like to say the diamond is in the details. The diamond that was in those details is that when a child has a well-written IEP, a well-written 504 plan, when a program has utilized the multilingual learner resources, they've done that home language survey, they've put systems in place to support those children, you see that they were not disproportionately represented in that suspended and expulsion number. So what does that tell us? The operative word you heard me say there is the program or the plan. So we learned there, like, what is this? Because oftentimes it was like, they needed IEP, they needed IEP. That's why, we're getting all this challenging behavior. But look at that. the data told us that those were not necessarily the students. When we looked at that, because they have a prescriptive program and the individualized education program or a 504 plan, or when those multilingual resources and services have been put in place and a plan has been created for what that preschool program is going to do, it almost gave us the best script of how to address the needs of the child. So now here's that transferring and generalization again. If we can use an IEP, a 504 plan, or a good solid multilingual service plan for a child, maybe we can learn how to write plans for children, not just we need a functional behavior assessment plan. No, what are the good plans we can put in place that let us know we can be proactive and preventive when it comes to children who struggle when it comes to social emotional development. And that's going to be the language you're going to hear me using from now on. Social emotional development, not so much challenging behavior. They have a greater need from us when it comes to their social emotional development, learning, and competency. Now, I'm going to tell you something about the UIC study. Here are some nitty-gritties of it. Okay, that first one was why we had to do a study across the state, because immediately people started saying, yeah, but that study said it's Chicago. It's not us. Like I live all the way in St. Clair County. This doesn't have anything to do with us. But across our state, there are center-based programs. Across our state, there all are full publicly funded programs. Across our state, we are a very, very diverse state, and the data showed, and now we're all administrators here, right? The data did show that when you looked at where these programs were situated, and when it came to their accelerate, the majority of the programs were had received the designation of bronze. Okay. It's important to note that we did not just stop at that 2002 study, because it was focusing on Chicago. The efforts were really broadened to see, is this a dilemma that we have across our state? The answer was yes. And then, of course, Gilliam's study and the Office of Civil Rights, their data said this is actually a problem we have across our country. So we're addressing it. We started out by saying, why are we even talking about this? That's the contextual background as to why we're talking about it. What you see before you here is why we should address it. When we think about that second one, it occurs more frequently in early childhood education and care. We got into this business of early childhood because we know that the seed that is being planted and cultivate it well, that's the early childhood seed. That's preschool for all, that's preschool for all expansion, that's prevention initiative, it's early intervention, it's early childhood special education. And from that seed that we plant and that we cultivate well, everything else grows. And so when there's a frequency of children being criminalized by expulsion and suspension when they are young, what does it do to the mindset of that child as they grow older and they get in kindergarten and they get in third grade and they get in middle school and they start getting to the point to where they say, well, I know in the state I live, they may forget their homework, but they know in our state I can drop out at this age. These things start when children are young. So that's why we want to address it. And then that second to last one, there is no evidence at all to support the effectiveness of expulsion or suspension. How do we know? I'm sure Jenny could attest to, like, oh my gosh, because we get a lot of phone calls from people. They've gone from this program to this program, or this district to this district. And we see that the social emotional needs of the child were not addressed. And so we see that same behavior. We also, I know this as a consultant, when I'm consulting in districts, I hear that same language. Well, the child just keeps doing the same. Either they do the same thing or they put a little twist on that behavior and they do something a little bit different. So we know that expelling them is like suspending a child for being truant. The child isn't coming to school. And so our answer to that is we suspend them, right? It's like the cure is worse than the disease. It's really not giving us the answer to what we need. So since there's no research that really says it's effective, since we know that we want to make our children excited about teaching and learning. We want them excited to come to school. Even if they don't remember us, they may not remember your preschool program. They may not remember, Miss Antoinette, the administrator. We want them to remember their love for learning as they age out of our programs. And so what you see before you here is why we want to address it. So then how do we address it? Well, there's a law for that. And in Illinois, the law is the Early Childhood Expulsion Bill. Notice it's birth to 5. So when we say early childhood here, we really are in that realm of our youngest children to age 5. It is a complementary bill to the K-12 bill, SB 100. In fact, when this bill was created, former House Representative Juliana Stratton was the author of this bill. She wasn't our lieutenant governor at that time. She was in our state House of Representatives. She actually worked closely with Senator Lightford, who wrote the K-UP bill, to make sure that the bill spoke to each other, or the language in the bill spoke to each other. Now, the Early Childhood Expulsion Bill is sometimes incorrectly referred to as suspension and expulsion law. In Illinois, we do have a law that speaks to suspension of children in the early years. That bill is law PA 100. You do have the language for this law as well. This law was written to complement the expulsion bill, and it does so in what we call it's in the chronic absenteeism bill. And the Early Childhood Chronic Absence Bill, it explicitly states that chronic absence is excused, unexcused, and any suspension for a child has to be written, is a part of the report on children attendance through chronic absenteeism. Okay, so that's the bill that talks about suspension of children, how we document that, and it was literally written hand in hand with the expulsion bill, so that again the bills talked to each other. Okay, and you do have a link for that in your handouts. So what are the goals of the Early Childhood Expulsion Bill? We want to ensure early childhood education and care programs engage in that developmentally appropriate evidence-based practices that will prohibit expulsion of young children due to child behavior, and that we want best practices in their disciplinary actions. We want to utilize and connect schools and programs to existing resources and supports to address, and I love that this is how the law says, the various needs of children. When we look at behavior that exhibits itself because of a child being in duress, when we drill down, sometimes there are a lot of things happening in our children in the communities. The Risk and Reach report showed us that long before the Risk and Reach report came out from Erickson. If you remember Yuri Brofenbrenner, he told us from that system, that micro system, that the child is at the center, and what happens in the child's home impacts the child. What happens in the community impacts the home and impacts the child. What happens in the workplace, it impacts the family, so on and so forth, right? Children have needs for many, many reasons, and we want to make sure that we're connecting the resource, the support, and the strategy to the need of the child. And we've got to improve the way we collect data. Why? Because data helps us make good decisions. It helps us ask the right question and helps us get the right answer. I love data. It's not a dirty 4-letter word. Data really is the way that we get to our answers. And it doesn't just have to be quantitative data, qualitative data, the voice of your staff. That's good qualitative data. What are they seeing? Where did they see it? With whom did they see it? Asset based, where didn't they see that duress? In this particular setting, this particular child who always has a problem when we're having gross motor time and we're outside never has a problem here. That's good qualitative data that comes from teacher and staff voice. Now, for my colleagues who are on here with us today, where you are a Head Start program or your community-based program, and so you're also part of your day is PFA funding. Head Start has been addressing this expulsion for many years, right? And so if you are a community-based program that is under Head Start, this is written right in the Head Start frameworks and standards. Here's what it says, and then here's actually where it is written in the Head Start law, or framework, I should say. We want to promote their social and emotional development. How do we do that? Keep them in the program. We could take that out and say, we want to promote their language development. How do we do that? Keep them in the program. We want to promote their math development. How do we do that? Keep them in the program. Physical health development. How do we do that? Keep them in the program. The same way we would say with language arts, with science, with math, with health, with physical development, with our multilingual learner standards, right? The best way to support the child and help them to learn is to keep them in the program. Head Start has a long-standing focus on family engagement. We need our families in order to do this work well. Now, so what does that mean, Dr. Taylor? Planned transitions are not considered expulsion. I really could put my hat here for our whole time. Jenny talked about this a little bit earlier. Planned transitions. The operative phrase there is, what is your plan? Who knows the plan? And the answer to that is, everyone needs to know. Not one of those need to know basis. If all the resources have been exhausted. And part of those resources is we have done everything we can to implement and use resources to fidelity. We've done in-service training. We've gone to conferences. We've gone to the PFA, virtual administrator forum. We've gone to the PFA forum in April. We have done all of these things to fidelity. We have been working with the family. The family is aware. You may reach the point where you're saying, okay, what might we need to do next? A planned transition is not considered an expulsion. It's planned when it's done with parents, when it's done with applicable providers, when it's done with the community, when it's done with a mental health consultant, who is going to be the receiving program or receiving district. Everyone has come to the table and sat down together and said, we are all stakeholders in creating a plan for this family and this child who will be transitioning from our program or our classroom someplace else. Okay, and remember, if you have questions as they pop up, go ahead and put them in the chat. We are watching that. Okay, and I just saw something that came up. You all are typing kind of fast, so I want to see if I can go back to it. Trauma. I have some children in my program that we need support for behaviors and trauma. We are having teacher burnout and very little support. need to know more of what the process is, where we are all needing to do in order to transition students and support their families without putting the program and other students at risk. Okay, so right there, that behavior support for behaviors and trauma, there is an app for that. We're going to talk about it a little bit before we leave today, that those resources that I told you about, some of them are on there, and we're actually, I'm talking a little fast because I actually want to get to the point to we're going to pull up one of these resources and try to walk you through it just a little bit, and then loose you and let you kind of go through it on your own and then come back and share. That trauma-informed practices, it is a part of what we need to support our, not only our students that have that social emotional barrier to learning, but many of our students. And so we do have resources that help us do that. And I would also like to say at this point that a child that's part of the drill down of addressing challenging behavior, or a child that is exhibiting behavior that shows itself because of duress. Is there some type of trauma? Is there some type of social emotional need? Is it maybe they're trying to escape a task? Do they have a problem with transitioning from one task to a next? There is a drill down that helps us answer that question even before we get to the point of saying, okay, we think we need to have a transition plan for this child. Everything that you want to do, it goes into your planning. And there's a really good article or reading out from actually National Center for Pyramid Model Innovations, and it's called the Teaching Pyramid. It literally reminds us that everything that we're doing, we're teaching, and it breaks down the data. And it also gives us some really good strategies as well. I'm going to try to pull it up and share it with you all before we end today. But looking at trauma and looking at the source of that trauma, those are things that we do have in place for you. And you do need to consider that before you reach that point of transition. If there is trauma involved, you want to utilize your mental health consultants. I'm a teacher, right? I'm a consultant. I'm going to call a mental health consultant. If your teachers are feeling burnt out, it could be because they are trying to address something that's outside of their discipline. It's like the teacher saying, well, okay, this child needs speech language therapy, I'm going to do that. No, there's related service personnel that do speech language, that do occupational therapy, that do physical therapy. Utilize your mental health consultants. We did put that information on there for you to find out who a mental health consultant is in your area, how to try to get one referred to you. So allow your mental health consultants to really support you when it comes to those things that you believe are very trauma-based behaviors that you are seeing for children. And then they will also give your teachers those tips and strategies as well. Here's a little bit more about what the law, the rules and regs say about transitions. As you look at that second bullet point, it's important for us to think of, if I'm thinking about removing, I should have interventions, strategies in place. I have got to make sure that every single person in my building, those of us that, I know Chicago uses CLASS, most of the rest of the state uses ECHRS 3. ECHRS 3 is very clear that when they say staff, they're not talking about the teacher. Staff in ECHRS 3 is defined as any adult that's regularly involved with the child. And so when we talk about intervention or we talk about strategies, any adult that's regularly involved with the children that are in our program, we want to make sure that everyone is aware of the plan. We want to make sure everyone is aware of the strategies. We want to make sure everyone is aware of the intervention and the good instructional practices. Now, here's what happened in Illinois. One law, we had two different agencies to go through that law and make sense of it for their agency. Okay? The rules and the regs come from the State Board of Education and according to the program that you have, Department of Children and Family Services. So I'm going to just press pause here. When this law was written, when the law was passed, you saw that it was passed in 2017. The goal of the legislative body, the goal of the governor, the goal of the State Board of Education, the goal of Department of Children and Family Services is that the rules and regulations would come down together and really be kind of like they dated for a while and then they got engaged and they decided to get married, okay? A lot of things happened to prevent that, to the fault of no one. Honest to goodness, it was just the fault of no one. There's a process that has to be done before anyone can just say, well, these are the rules and regulations. A notice of proposed rulemaking has to go out to the public. The public has to get an opportunity to respond and give input. And based off of the way that input comes back, the governing agency by law has to go back and begin to edit, right? And so as they are editing, iterations come out. And then it has to go back out for the public to look at, review, and give input again. That process has to happen until by law, there's a very small percentage of input coming from the public that informs the practice. It just so happened that with the State Board of Education, that process was finalized in 2019. And with the Department of Children and Family Services, that process was not finalized until August 2020. That's why we gave you so many resources on Department of Children and Family Services, as well as the State Board of Education, because what was happening August 2020? We were all still trying to figure out, first of all, what is COVID-19? Are we going to be back in our buildings? What started in March as 2 weeks clearly was more than 2 weeks. And so a lot of people missed when those rules came out for Department of Children and Family Services and have kind of been groping in the dark. This is our way of letting you know, number one, again, the rules and regulations are out. It's also letting you know this. It was an arranged marriage, everyone. It was one of those things like get married, fall in love later. It wasn't like I'm going to date you and then, we'll decide if we want to get engaged and we'll get married. We still, to this day, are working hard to make sure that it's one law that had two agencies figuring it out and then asking us to implement it. It is an ongoing process, just like any other relationship. And so as you are looking through the resources that we gave you, please be in touch with DCFS. Please be in touch with the State Board of Education. If you see, especially if you are a Head Start program, and so you're like, but DCFS is saying this, and I'm reading this and interpreting it one way, and I also have PFA or PFAE funding, so I'm looking at this and interpreting it another way. Both of the resource pages that you have, it has the email address for you to send that email off to DCFS, for you to send an email off to Illinois State Board of Education to just say, hey, we have a clarifying question, or we have a wondering. If you are we have a PFA or PFA coach or a PFAE support specialist through ECPL, bring it up to your coach, bring it up to your support specialist, and then they can help you bring it to the State Board of Education. But the goal is to triangulate the process between the PFA coaches, the PSS support that comes from ECPL, DCFS, and the Illinois State Board of Education so that we can triangulate the information and make sure as much as possible we're speaking with one voice. And for those of you that are saying my teachers are so burned out, they're not just burned out because of what you are seeing as duress behavior. They're burned out because they're trying to figure out, what am I supposed to do? Which one of these things am I supposed to listen to? What am I supposed to implement? When you triangulate the information and try to speak with one voice, it makes it much easier for us to not only attain, but sustain our practices. Here is the intent of the law, and this is not the intent of the law. This is what you see before you. We want the removal of children to be the last resort. That documentation is so important, and it's got to be documentation for real documentation's sake. Not so we can say, well, we wrote all this down. Can we suspend them now? Can we expel them now? What were we doing? If we have a list of egregious acts by the child that looks like this, and then our steps to document how we supported them look like this, that's a problem. So we want to really authentically document, observe, and we know if we have PFA or PFAE program, observing children for either DRDP, My Teaching Strategies, work sampling systems, early learning scale, whatever curriculum you're using, there is an observation and assessment tool for that. So what we document all the time, the documentation helps us know what worked, when did it work? How do we get to that point of working? Or we tried this several times and it didn't work. And that documentation should include professional learning and services, all of the things that we did. It's not to say, no matter what, that child has to stay in that setting. It is to say, if we come to that point to where the family is fully informed, the family's been fully involved, we've worked with our mental health consultants, we've worked with our ISB consultants, we've been in touch with DCFS. If we come to that point, we've got a plan, but it certainly doesn't mean that no matter what, a child must stay in their setting. Okay, that's not the intent of the law. As you all look at this, I'm going to ask you to go in the chat. Here's a little survey that went out when this law was first being implemented. And what you see here are the 3 things that respondents said. 44%, and that's quite a bit, of all respondents said this law is not going to be effective. It's not going to do a thing to help us with suspension and expulsion because we've just got too much challenging behavior. The second highest response to the law was it would increase teacher stress, risk to children, lawsuits, and that falsified documentation, that was a real one. And then the third one is there's also limited fear of repercussions. So kind of like, well, who's going to find out if we're doing this? They can't do anything to us. So as you look at those, I want you to go in the chat and briefly share your thoughts there. And I'm going to try to read some of them out. Now, I did say I wasn't going to call out any names, but there's somebody on here that I just missed. Look at her, she's smiling because she knows I'm going to say her name. Hi, Kimberly, honey. How are you, babe? Here's my big virtual hug. Okay, back to our regular schedule program. Share your thoughts in the chat. I'm seeing a lot of you are really looking at teacher burnout. I love that one, Josie. We need to be more proactive in our responses so that teachers feel heard and supported. And so I love that you all keep writing, but Josie, I really appreciate you saying that because, you know, nothing is worse than the teacher that they're like going to their administrator or they're going to the state board or DCFS or ECPL or even a consultant, you know, such as myself when I'm in a district or a program, and they're saying, hey, this is a problem. And it's kind of like, well, what are you doing? That teacher is not going to feel heard. And in fact, they're going to almost feel indicted. So having that system in place or that I know this feels so cliche, but that those in services and those opportunities, not venting, but voicing. Because when we vent, it's just like, but when we voice is solutions based. It's almost like saying, okay, we hear you, you have voiced this, and so now we're going to start working on solutions. What is the resolution to this? And I do think that, you know, we think of challenging behavior, oftentimes we do think about what does the child need, that support for your teachers. I'm a strong believer that if we take care of, when we're taking care of the teachers and giving them the support, the overflow of that is it naturally flows down to the children. Oh, Jennifer. Oh, West Chicago. You are my third co-facilitator. It's important to start with a strong tier 1 to support all children with the classroom. Multi-tiered system of supports. What is your foundational practice in your program? There's that transferable, there's that generalizable. What are the foundation, everything that we have in the foundation of what we're doing? That's not even tier 1. That's just good building maintenance, right? You build your program, you build all of your practices in such a way so that you have very strong foundational, universal, right? This is important. So we do it for every single child that comes into our program. We engage with every family. We provide professional learning. We provide that support for every teacher. Do we have to differentiate sometimes? Of course we do, just like we differentiate for children. We also differentiate our practices based off of our data for our teachers. But that foundational practice, it creates the system of all of these tiered supports and intervention strategies that we are utilizing. And again, that speaks to teacher burnout because then teachers are not trying to figure out, well, how am I going to do all these things? We're synthesizing these practices so that they can, again, it's manageable for them. Oh, we're going to get to that. Hey, Miss Brandy, another one. We're going to get to that in all. Yep, all does mean all. And as you all kind of if we come out of that, I would just like to remind us, you know, that all really does mean all. And so when we have new staff that comes in, even if it's mid-year, thank you, Miss Randy, did we do a training for them? Did we sit down and go over not just, you know, whatever your social emotional development tool may be? Did we go over training with them with the standards, with the curriculum, you know, with my teaching strategies? Everything that we said is important with new staff. Did we go over the training with them? Did we make sure that our orientation wasn't, okay, here's when the open enrollment period is for health insurance? We've got to make sure that everyone knows everything that we're asking them to do. And that is what we call support. And it is, I definitely want to make sure that I call that out, the staff shortages. It is difficult to do it, but I don't want to say but because my mom always told me when you say but, it negates everything you said before that. So teaching shortages, it is a real thing, Carrie. It's hard to support teachers with these issues with all the staffing shortages. That's also why we want to dig our heels in and support the staff that we have because they are good staff. They are there. They want to be there. We want to keep them there. This does take some kind of wheeling and dealing, looking at your calendar to see, especially for our colleagues who are community-based programs, it's really hard to have that time when you're like, okay, we don't have any students, we're going to simply focus on, and really in service, that's staff care. That's making sure that we are taking the time to make sure our staff have everything that they need. Sometimes you do have to do that without children being present. And so for those of us, if you're in a district and you do have those in-service days, really create a good, tight, and right agenda. And we want to spend less time with like, okay, here's the district housekeeping. Of course, we know we need to do that, but more time on supporting the teachers and the tasks that we're asking them to do. For our community-based programs, I do want to encourage you to look at your calendar and see if there are places in there where you can inform your families way in advance. Hey, on this day, we are not going to be open. And if you say to families, and the reason why we're not going to be open to receive students is because we are taking the staff for a good, solid training on practices that are going to help them support and teach your child better. If they know that way in advance, you will find that your families can adjust to those 1 or 2 days. You might be starting there at the beginning of this practice, where you are not having the children in the building so that you can better serve them when they come. Those are the things that we're going to have to do. We've all heard the announcement from the governor and all the things that are trying to happen to increase pay and to make this process doable. But we also heard the governor's announcement say that this is going to be over some years. So our just-in-time right now strategies that we want to do is try to think of ways where you can provide in-services for your staff. Include your again, staff is all the children, everyone that's regularly involved with the child. So it's not just the teachers who are your paraprofessionals, your paraeducators. Maybe if you have staff there that are like your regular volunteers, everyone needs to be a part of that, so that we want to embrace the teachers that we have and make sure that they know that they are valued and that we do hear their voice, and that we are willing to do more than just say, well, you need to do this. We're also willing to say, we're asking you to do this, and so now here is the resource and support we're going to give you in doing it. It can take a little finagling, but I do know that you will always, it's always worth it when you do that. So we're talking about training. You see, before I talked about early childhood mental health support. We've talked about that before a little bit. In-service and supervisory staff as well. Oh my gosh, are they going to say this again? Yes, we are. This virtual, why is ECPL along with the State Board of Education doing these virtual administrative forums? Supervisory staff need the support as well. So you need to support that. There's Jenny. Jenny, make sure you Jenny, please come to the conference in April, because you and I are going to go for some Starbucks, okay? Because Jenny is like, yes, supervisors, like supervisors need love too. That's what these administrative forums are all about. It's about giving you that space to step away from the teachers, the parents, the students, the custodial staff, to come with your colleagues and learn about this. So then you can begin to say, okay, now that I've got this, I know how to help my staff. But the supervisory staff, it's grass tops and grassroots as well. And the grass tops is the PFA, the administrators. So not only this virtual, but coming together in April. And it's been such a long time. I'm really looking forward to the sessions. And again, Jenny and Cindy's the project director of ECPL, are really looking at the chat and looking at all of your emails and comments that are coming in to even make the decision, hey, does this even need to be a deeper session at the administrators forum? So keep it coming. Coaching and consultation. There are PFA coaches, there are pyramid coaches, there are PSS support staff, there is early, mental health consultation, trying not to leave anyone out there to make it feel like, gosh, I've just got to on my own figure out all of these practices. Of course, professional development. really needs to include family engagement. How are we engaging our families? So important. The family is the first teacher, and the family is the expert at parenting their child. This is what the data and research shows us when we have a lack of family engagement. They can't hear us when we say, hey, you know what, Miss Doe or Mr. Doe, we wanted to talk to you about some of the experiences we're seeing in the classroom. That wall goes up, right? And then that finger pointing, and no family is really going to engage us when we have that accusatory language, or we haven't really built up those good, strong relationships in advance. So we know that with lack of family engagement, we have higher expulsion rates. We have higher chronic absence rates when it comes to lack of family engagement. We found that out during the time our state had an attendance commission. So much pointed to why children were not in building. It had to do with the way schools and families are engaging and connecting with each other. Briefly in the chat, describe how you engage families in your program and barriers that you've seen. Just drop a couple of things in there. Oh, love that one, Erica. Yeah, families are shy. Sometimes they might be feeling insecure. You know, generationally speaking, from generation to generation, there are some of our families that school has just not been a good or fun place for them. And so if it hasn't been a good or fun place for the family and the memories that they have, right, when it comes from when they were in school, especially if it's a family that's like, I've been in this district for so long, that person was my teacher. There might be some insecurities there. Being afraid, right? When I go in the building this time, what are they gonna say? Tell me about my child. When we think about families, it's so important to think about the lens. We are looking at a student, the family is looking at the child. Same human being, but from a program or district level, we're looking at the student. The family is talking about their child. I'm going to put this in the chat. This is in your handout, but real quick, I just want us to take a minute. Go ahead and open that up. It's the My Child Doesn't Do That at Home. Yep, we've got some time here. I want you to take about 2 minutes-ish and look that over, and then we're going to come back and talk about it. So as you look at that, what is one thing that pops out to you when you read that my child doesn't do this at home, but he doesn't do this at home? Go ahead and put it in the chat. Maybe in the classroom they're overstimulated. Maybe in the home they're the only child. They don't have all that stimulation in the home that they do and have in the building. Completely different environments and settings, and maybe even expectations. Seeing so many, oh, Jeannie, yeah, trust with the family member that maybe hasn't been developed in the classroom just yet. Yeah, Monica, there's not 19 other children in the home as there are in the classroom. Okay, so I love this reading, and this is actually from the Illinois Early Learning Project. They have such good resources. I really love this because it reminds me when the family says, we don't know what you're talking about, believe them. They're not out to get you, I promise. It's not like this family has never liked me from day one. They really may not understand or have experienced what you're talking about. Because when we think about that lens, right, of the parent versus the teacher, it is a different lens. And so now, with just that little bit you were able to read there, look how we can change this same thing to an asset-based lens. How do you engage your families in your program? Instead of thinking the barriers, just real quick, jump in there. What are the opportunities? Just that little reading, how it can help us. Consuelo, yeah. If they don't have rules at home and then they come to your school and you have all these widely held expectations, not only is the child baffled by that, sometimes the family is like, what do you mean? And culturally, this is important because this is where that understanding the families, the cultural understanding of our families is important. And that's why that family engagement is so important, because we need to understand the cultural dynamics that come into play when in a classroom versus in the community and versus in the home environment. And again, we keep trying to have all of these arranged marriages work, and that can be sometimes difficult to do. There's other supports out there. And when the law was written, especially in Illinois, the legislator is very, very clear about, well, who's going to support this work? And there's what we call a fiscal note that happens in the legislative side. And that fiscal note is where there's a whole team down in Springville, and they'll come back and say, oh, this might be too costly, or there'll be minimal cost, or there will be no cost to this at all. Okay. When the law was created, it was created, and that fiscal note was to help us understand what are the resources that are going to be available. Okay. Now, I've put National Center on Pyramid Model Innovations. I cannot, to protect the confidentiality of programs that are on, I will not call them out, but I know for a fact that Conscious Discipline, many Head Start and community-based programs have partnered with Conscious Discipline. And so I know for a fact that Conscious Discipline is out there. Some districts are also using Calm Classroom, Second Step, and that IELG, IELDS there at the bottom, those are our standards, okay? So we're going to take a little bit of time to talk about one of these resources just now. This is also on your sheet, but I want to talk about it a little bit now. And I use this symbol for Prince because at first he was Prince, and then, he was formerly known as Prince. He used this symbol. This iteration in our country is not new. For those of you that will remember CCEFL when it was at Vanderbilt, like I became a trainer on social emotional practices, like from the horse's mouth when this was at Vanderbilt. Look at Kim shaking her head. Thank you. Right. So then it went from CCEFL, and then they lost that grant, and then we was known as Taxi, and then now it's known as the pyramid model. And so CEFL, pyramid, Taxi are all housed in National Center for Pyramid Model Innovations. And first of all, I want to tell you, this free resource, it's just I can't say enough good things about it. First of all, because they're constantly responding to the needs of states. They responded so well with the pandemic. Some of those trauma-informed things that you're talking about are housed within here. I'm actually going to go into the site real quick and show you a little bit about it. So on your screen, Kim, can you shake your head? Do you see my NCPMI? Okay, first thing I want to tell you, when you go on here, have a pen and a piece of paper ready, because as you go through each drop down, you're going to see something that's going to cause your attention. Write it down, because there's just so much information on here, because they're trying to meet the needs like of international people, right? So there's enough on here for you to kind of smorgasbord out and pick and choose what you need for your program or your teachers or your students or families. But I want you to be able to remember, how did I get to this in the first place? So if you're hovering over classroom, and then that opens up, look at that. Practical strategies, infant toddler classroom, family child care home, children's books. Then you go down here a little bit more. If you click on practical strategies, it's going to start giving you information. Most of it is in English and in Spanish as well. You go down a little bit further, you click on that, hover over that, you get general resources. You will find information that you will be able to use. And that's just from me going over the implementation tab and hovering over classroom. Okay. This is a wonderful resource to use. It is free. Bring your teachers together and say, you know what, for this in-service, we're going to just try to dig deep in. Like, okay, a lot of us are saying we're seeing this. Let's try to find the resources, and then don't just find them, make them a part of your plan. Not just, we don't expel students. Okay, this is what we're doing to prevent the expulsion of students, to prevent the burnout of staff, to prevent disengagement of families. Create all of these things, use it in your plan. And again, make sure you're writing down. Thank you, Kim. Thank you so much. I oftentimes, when I'm consulting with programs or districts, and I really like to get in the nitty gritty of this, and then I have everyone, let's just start posting what we found, and then we do a walkabout in the room. Before you were scanning QR codes, we would do parking lots, right? And you could walk around and people would say, oh my gosh, I never thought about that. And then not only do we talk about it, then I'll say, okay, now what does this look like in practice? We found this great resource. Let's act it out. We say we've got this student in that moment. How are we going to implement this practice? Here is one. I also want to share with you, I'm going to stop sharing here, a resource that's specific to Illinois. It is on your, it is definitely on your resource page, but I just want to highlight it. The Illinois Early Learning Project is another wonderful, wonderful resource that you can have for yourself. I'm putting that in the chat as well. And when you go on that site, type in behavior, that form that we just went over, but he doesn't do this at home. I actually got that off the Illinois Early Learning Project website. It's really, really good, everyone. And what I really like about this, they have most of their resources and tip sheets in several languages. And if by chance you don't find the language that you need, you can email them. And I tell you, they are so quick to respond. I've seen like their turnaround time being like 24, 48 hours. You do have on your handout, for those of you, again, who are many of our Head Start programs, I know for a fact are partnered with and contracted with Conscious Discipline. So on your handout, you definitely have Conscious Discipline free resources. They really responded to people saying, hey, not everyone is buying your whole system. And so they have given us free resources on their website. And as we close out, woohoo! Okay, I got to move fast. You're at 2:26. I'm going to just talk about this. Look at this picture. Real quick, you all jump in the chat. What's your immediate thought when you look at this picture? Go ahead and put it in the chat. Oh, Dr. Amy, behavior is a form of communication. Ooh, you might be reading my mind, Dr. Amy. Communication, behavior, tired, hungry, frustrated. Jenny can't verbalize. Penny, he needs more than a toy, possibly attention. So many of you are saying communication. Keep them coming, and I'm going to move on. I showed you all this slide before. I'm coming back to it again to talk about the Illinois Early Learning Guidelines and Illinois Early Learning and Development Standards. One resource that we underutilize, you all, is our standards. Where in fact, in Illinois, we have very good social and emotional development standards. So I want you all to just look at this. Thinking of that picture, look at this. That's something that we could teach a child. Because in that picture, we don't know if this child has this knowledge, skill, or ability. That's a language arts standard. Social emotional development, learning, social emotional development, competency, and learning. We have standards. There's an app for that. In the standards, look at this standard. Think of that picture. Look at the two of them together. I promise you, in your buildings where you have that struggle and that tension, I'm burned out. This behavior keeps coming up, down. It's because they're only focusing on strategies and not the standards as well. Strategies will halt behavior, but we know that we get these popcorn effects because that's why you all are on today. Instruction changes the behavior. So with that strategy, every single time you talk about a strategy, you have to be talking about a standard. And watch this. Look at your screen. Watch this. Boop. Look at that. I didn't even have to get up out of my seat. I don't consult. I don't create a presentation. I don't do a keynote. I don't even have to get up out of my chair to get the standards. Everything, the moment the child is calm, every moment that child is calm, what do I want to teach them? What's the behavior? What's the skill? What's the knowledge that I want to teach the child? Everything we want the students to know and be able to do, including behavior, we must be willing to teach them. So please, please utilize your standards. I'm kind of having to go, I'm going to end up right here. When you utilize the standards along with the strategies, compliance is the floor. It's like the basement of our practice. We want to get to the ceiling. We want to get above the storm. If you're ever on a plane, and I'm going to close this out here, when you're flying, sometimes the captain will come on and say, ladies and gentlemen, we want you to keep your seatbelts on. We got a little bit of turbulence because we're flying into a storm. Keep those seatbelts on because what they're going to do is fly above the storm, above the turbulence. And then when they get up there, they say, the captain has turned off the seatbelt sign. Now we're free to move about the cabin. Compliance gets you stuck in. They said we have to do this. Did we do the checklist? Yes. Can we suspend them now? Can we expel them now? The step is to move from compliance to evidence-based practices, developmentally appropriate practices, use your standards, use your strategies, so you can get to the point of this is just how we do equitable, integrity, attainable, and sustainable practices. Thank you for your time today. I just know I'm going to see you all in April. Woo-hoo. There's so many wonderful places to go out and eat there. No, we're going to see you all in April. No, we are going to save this chat. Please send your questions, comments to ISB or DCFS, PFA, PFAE programs. You can get pyramid modules for free from ECPL. I wish all of us peace. I wish our nation, our country, our world peace. You are an administrator. You cannot administrate well if you're not rested. So get your rest in there too. Thank you, everyone. I'll turn you back over to Jenny and Tammy.
Thanks so much, Dr. Taylor. And thank you again, everybody, for your participation on today's Administrator Forum session for the 2023-24 school year. We will be sending you a follow-up email after today's session with a link to the evaluation to complete for the access of your evidence of completion. And again, the recording of today's session will be posted to the Early Childhood Professional Learning YouTube channel, which also has all previous ECPL Administrator Forum sessions. So if you have not yet subscribed to the ECPL YouTube channel, you can do so by logging on to the ECPL website, and that's eclearningil.org. And also there, you will see some additional information on upcoming virtual forum sessions. So Jenny had also mentioned earlier, be sure to mark your calendars for the April 22nd, 23rd in-person administrator conference in Champaign, Illinois. We can tell you that the networking event will be the evening of the 22nd, and the conference will be on Tuesday, April 23rd. Additional details will follow and will be either sent via constant contact or we will be posting it on the ECPL website. So if you have any additional questions for today's session, feel free to email us at the ecpl@cntrmail.org.
Hey, Susie, there's a question on here from Miss Monique. Is the conference good for directors of child care centers?
Yes, this is for all administrators, for CBOs, for districts, ROEs. Yes.
Yep, Jenny, I can do that. Give me 1 second. I'm gonna I will put both the DCFS email address and the Illinois State Board of Education email address in the chat. Give me 1 second. I will do that right now. And then I'm also putting in there the ECPL as well. I will drop that right in the chat for you.
Thank you again, everybody. If you do have any additional questions or comments, you can type them in the chat room. Otherwise, at this time, you are welcome to sign out. And we look forward to seeing you at the next virtual session. And definitely at the in-person session in April.